In 2 more evenings, we're going to be celebrating the Festival of Tabernacles. So that will be this Wednesday evening until Thursday evening will be the first day of the Festival of Tabernacles. But this is actually celebrated for 7 full days. We live in temporary shelters for those 7 full days, and this is to be a lasting ordinance from generation to generation. Even though it's been fulfilled in terms of the first fulfillment, we're still to celebrate it. We're still to celebrate all of God's holy days. Lasting ordinance from generation to generation, wherever you live. That's what God has commanded regarding his holy days. That means a lasting ordinance from generation to generation, wherever you live. It means just that. So we celebrate this for 7 days. We rejoice for 7 days before the Lord, and we assemble and engage in Sabbath rest on the first day of the festival and on the last day of the festival, on the 8th day of the festival. Let's see what God has to say about it. But let's first take into context what we've observed thus far. So thus far, in the spring, we observed Passover and the Festival of Unleavened Bread, which is part of Passover, and we did that for 8 full days. The first day in which we ate lamb with bitter herbs, and we rid our house of yeast, we rid our house of sin, invoking the blood of the lamb. And then for 7 days, we ate unleavened bread, and this festival represents Christ and his atonement, his sacrifice as the once and for all sacrifice, the Lamb of God. Christ extended the covenant to us on this day. And then from the very end of that 8 days, the Sabbath, the day after the Sabbath, we count down 7 weeks up to 50 full days until the Festival of Weeks. And that is the time of Pentecost. So Festival of Weeks and Pentecost, Shavuot, whatever you want to call it, it's all the same thing. In fact, I should not say whatever you want to call it. I should say God called it these things. That's what you should call it. And if there are different names for it, then that's just giving us different aspects of what it means. So you're going to see that, you've been seeing that in the previous video that I posted on the Festival of Trumpets. It's also called the Festival of Ingathering. Well, which one is the right name? Well, it's also called Sukkot. It's also called the Festival of Booths. They are all the names, and they all give us a different aspect of what God's heart is regarding this particular feast. So in the previous video, I talked with you about the Festival of Ingathering. Now I'm going to be talking with you about the Festival of Tabernacles. Same event, but it's got a different name to give you a different aspect. So we observed Passover and the Festival of Unleavened Bread, which is all the Passover. Then we observed the Festival of Weeks, which was Pentecost, was the time when the first set of witnesses were anointed in the apostles. It's also the time when the second set of witnesses were anointed, the 2 witnesses, the 144,000, on Pentecost 2022. The Festival of Weeks, or Pentecost, or Shavuot, that represents the witnesses of God. It represents the first fruits. That's why that language is used, and you see first fruits being used regarding the apostles and the witnesses. Then there's a break. Then we have the summer period. And then we have, in the fall, the Festival of Trumpets, and there's a sacred assembly that is commemorated with trumpet blasts and a day of Sabbath rest. No regular work. You present a food offering to the Lord. This is the one holy day that always lands on a new moon as well, and we know that a new moon is marking a new thing. It's marking a new month, and this particular new moon, or Feast of Trumpets, Festival of Trumpets, is commemorating the fall holy days. Now, if you've studied this a little bit, hopefully you haven't come across this, but you may have come across Rosh Hashanah. Now, that is not a holy day. That is an addition to the scroll through rabbinical commentary, through Reformed Judaism, and what they have basically done is replaced God's holy day of the Festival of Trumpets with a worldly holiday of New Year. And so God established one calendar, but Reformed Judaism claims that there's an additional calendar, and that this calendar begins on the 7th month of God's calendar year. They refer to it as the creation calendar, claiming that this is when God created the earth, which is not in the Bible. Again, it's an addition to the scroll. It's an attempt to be like the world, and it's changing around God's times. And so if you knew anything about Sabbath year or the Shemitah year, you may have heard that began in the 7th month on this other calendar that's been added by Reformed Judaism. Well, God never added that calendar, nor did he tell us to do it. So you see that the Antichrist spirit is adding things in, moving around God's set times, right? Even adding in a leap year and an extra month to, the supposed Hebrew calendar. No, God didn't do any of that. He did not do that, and neither should we. So everything has gotten so off course that we as a body came together and actually discerned when the calendar is. So if you're looking these up online, you're not going to see that this is what's going on right now, but it most definitely is. And I would encourage you to take a look at God's calendar, which has 12 months, 354 days. It is set from new moon to new moon is 1 month. So that means from new moon to new moon are 29.5 days. That means a 354-day year on God's calendar. And so if you map out, for example, when Pentecost is or when whatever is based on that, you're going to see that the calendar should be earlier and earlier every single year because there's an 11-day discrepancy between God's calendar and the Gregorian calendar. But what Reform Judaism did was they added in a bunch of days and took away some days on months and added in another year, added in another calendar in order to correlate with a worldly Gregorian calendar. Well, God didn't tell us to do that. And so now it has completely thrown off all of his holy days in an attempt to change his set times. We were told that the Antichrist would do that. We were told in Daniel. And in modeling ourselves after the Gregorian calendar, that's exactly what we've followed. That's exactly what Reformed Judaism followed. Because who established that Gregorian calendar but the harlot Catholic Church? All right, so we have the Festival of Trumpets, and then we have the Day of Atonement. The Day of Atonement, we just observed, very serious and solemn holy day. We completely withheld from ourselves, and it sounds to me like everyone really got it, like they really took it seriously, withholding, fasting, and we all really got a lot out of it. Even some of us, I got a lot of messages from people who were grateful that I had shared about my fall that evening, where I did fast during the day, but once the sun went down, I really stuffed my face, and it was like, God did all this work to bring me into position, to bring me low. And here I go and returned right back to the flesh. Couldn't wait to return back to the flesh or something. But you know what? I learned something so important there because it did not feel good. I was actually delighting in being low. It was important. I was delighting in being deep with God. And then I went and gave myself permission to do something that was really just detestable, to overeat. And it did not feel good. And he ended up giving me a headache to deal with me. And I'm grateful. I'm grateful that he does that. Now, why is it important to withhold from ourselves? Because Jesus withheld from himself his entire life. The entire time that he was here, he withheld from himself in order to give to us, in order to be that sinless lamb. I could not even keep myself from sinning one day. I couldn't even keep myself from thinking about my to-do list and things I needed to do and, things like that. I mean, I'm told to withhold from myself. If I'm thinking about my to-do list, I'm in sin because I'm not even withholding from the work of my own hands in my mind. And it was really important for me to see that I could not keep myself clean for a day. It made me really realize how much I need him. So even though this, it's a challenge to get into this position, it's a lot to withhold from ourselves in that way. It is so important, and I'm so grateful for that holy day. All right, so that brings us to the next holy day, which is the Festival of Tabernacles. As we talked about the Festival of Ingathering, which is the same as the Festival of Tabernacles or Sukkot or the Festival of Booths, in which we live in sukkah, which are temporary shelters. That's all they are. So I just want to get some perspective. So Passover, representing Christ. Festival of Weeks, representing the witnesses, the apostles, and the first fruits of the harvest. And then we have the third pilgrimage. So there were 3 festivals that the Israelites or Jews were supposed to go to the temple, make a pilgrimage to the temple, and it was Passover, Festival of Weeks, and the Festival of Tabernacles. Festival of Ingathering represents the multitude in white robes. It represents those who are going to be saved. And this is representing all who are participating in that first resurrection. So all are martyrs. Do you recognize that? All are martyrs. Christ, the servants of God, the multitude in white robes, all are martyrs that are going up in that first resurrection. All are martyrs that are being represented in these 3 pilgrimage festivals. Christ, the very first fruits to God, the witnesses and apostles, first fruits to God, and the Lamb, multitude in white robes, they'll go next. Remember that the witnesses and the apostles, they will have died before the multitude in white robes. As we studied about the Festival of Ingathering, I spoke with you about presenting ourselves and the witnesses now presenting, gathering up, harvesting in, and presenting to God, here's your church. Here's the harvest, Lord. So this should be meaningful to you because many of you have come in this year. You should be understanding that as these trumpets are blowing, that this is what we're doing right now. This is what the witnesses are doing, is pulling everybody in to present to God. Here are your offerings. So keep that in mind as we're reading about the Festival of Tabernacles. The Lord said to Moses, "Say to the Israelites, on the 15th day of the 7th month, the Lord's Festival of Tabernacles begins, and it lasts for 7 days. The first day is a sacred assembly. Do no regular work. For 7 days present food offerings to the Lord, and on the 8th day hold a sacred assembly and present a food offering to the Lord. It is the closing special assembly. Do no regular work. These are the Lord's appointed festivals, which you are to proclaim as sacred assemblies for bringing food offerings to the Lord. The burnt offerings and grain offerings, sacrifices and drink offerings required for each day. These offerings are in addition to those for the Lord's Sabbaths and in addition to your gifts and whatever you have vowed, and all the free will offerings to give to the Lord. So begin with the 15th day of the 7th month after you have gathered the crops of the land." Who and what are the crops of the land at this point? So beginning with the 15th day of the 7th month, after you have gathered the crops of the land, celebrate the festival to the Lord for 7 days. The first day is a day of Sabbath rest, and the 8th day also is a day of Sabbath rest. So we're celebrating those who've come in. So those of you who've been in the assembly and you've watched people come in, have you not been rejoicing over people who have been coming in? Most certainly. You've learned what that's all about. So what are we celebrating? Are we celebrating food? Are we celebrating crops? Are we celebrating God's church, harvesting in his church, presenting his church to him? Many of you have been wanting to understand, what is my role? What is my role as a multitude? One of the multitudes in white robes. This is your role. This is your role. You're going to continue to present the offerings that you're bringing in. Everyone, by the way, is at a different stage. So you see some people who are just now coming in. You see others who have been doing this for a little while, and God is now using them within their families, with their parents, with their children, their husbands, their Uber drivers. And you see them learning how to be the light of the world, that they are being used and moved by God. And listen, we know that no one repents after the 5th trumpet. But here's the thing. No one's going to repent after those, of those who don't die from those plagues, no one repents. But you don't know. You don't know who's been praying. You don't know who's been asking for God to show them. And so you're going to be used right now at this time. And you need to be looking for the ways in which God wants to use you. Not making it up. Looking for the ways, praying and asking him, how do you want to use me? That's your job right now. Because you're going to need to keep presenting these offerings to God after I'm gone. Every year, every time you go to that temple, right? Every time you're making that pilgrimage, you need to be presenting to him. Every month that you're observing new moon, you need to be presenting to him. You need to be reflecting on, what am I bringing to God? Every Sabbath, you need to be reflecting on, what have I done this week? What am I bringing to him? Because that's what you're doing Sabbath after Sabbath. Every Sabbath that you show up, you are being poured out as an offering, listening and attuning yourself to what he's building in you, and then you're bringing that offering to Sabbath assembly. You're sharing that offering and that word that he has built in you, and you're presenting that before him. So make sure you're taking it seriously, because you need to bring acceptable offerings to him. All right, verse 40. I'm sorry, did I not say where we're at? We're in Leviticus 23, in case you didn't know. Leviticus 23, we started at verse 33, And now we're going to read from verse 40, but I want to review actually. In verse 39 it says, "So beginning with the 15th day of the 7th month, after you've gathered the crops of the land, celebrate the festival to the Lord for 7 days. The first day is a day of Sabbath rest, and the 8th day is also a day of Sabbath rest." Okay, so 2 assemblies. On the first day, you are to take branches from luxuriant trees, from palms, willows, and other leafy trees, and rejoice before the Lord your God for 7 days. Okay, so this is a time of rejoicing, whereas the Day of Atonement was a solemn assembly. This is a time of rejoicing. What are you rejoicing over? I mean, if you're presenting those you just gathered in from the field, remember that Christ says, "The harvest is white, but the workers are few. Ask the Lord of the harvest, therefore, to send out workers into his field." You're rejoicing. We've just gone out into the field and we've been harvesting in his people. So we rejoice over that. Now, a lot of you are some of you are in the phase of just starting to be moved by God, and maybe you haven't harvested anything in yet. But you know the feeling of having a conversation with someone or daring to, say something, and then that person responding. You know that feeling of rejoicing, don't you? Or watching people come in and hearing that they truly have a heart for God. Now, one thing, I actually went back to verse 39 because I had thought that was where this was, but actually it was verse 38. "These offerings are in addition to those for the Lord's Sabbaths, and in addition to your gifts and whatever you have vowed, and all the free will offerings you give to the Lord." So I want you to hear that, because on these holy days, you are bringing something in addition to. So what God has been doing is he's been training you every single Sabbath after Sabbath. Every single day you're supposed to be looking for what he's building in you, so that when you show up on Sabbath, you have an offering to bring for him. So he's training you every day and every week. And then once a month on New Moon, you're also bringing offerings. So you should be looking at, okay, what am I bringing for the month to him? And then on the holy days, you're bringing something in addition. So he's constantly training you to be mindful of what you're going to bring for him day after day, week after week, month after month, and then during these seasons, so that his seasons being modeled after the harvest season. Is God just likening harvest to the harvest season, or did he establish the harvest season in order to teach you what it is to harvest for him? And God's not hungry, so it's not about sacrificing animals and bringing him fruit and vegetables and grain and all of this stuff. He's not hungry. He established that to teach you what is pleasing to him. He also established that so that you would understand what his ultimate sacrifice means. What does it mean to eat of his flesh and drink of his blood? And what does it mean that he's the bread of life? What does it mean that he's living water? What does it mean that he's pouring new wine into you, into the new wineskins that he placed in you, that new heart? He's established all of these things in order to teach you spiritual significance, to teach you what is meaningful to him. All right, so let's go back to verse 41. Actually, verse 40. "So on that first day, you're to take branches from luxuriant trees, from palm, willows, and other leafy trees, and rejoice before the Lord your God for 7 days. Celebrate this as a festival to the Lord for 7 days each year. This is to be a lasting ordinance for the generations to come. Celebrate it in the 7th month. Live in temporary shelters for 7 days. All native-born Israelites are to live in such shelters, so your descendants will know that I had the Israelites live in temporary shelters when I brought them out of Egypt. I am the Lord your God." Why does he have you do it? So that your descendants will know that I had the Israelites live in temporary shelters when I brought them out of Egypt. Now, if you do this, and I know this is a difficult thing, it's challenging, especially for an entire week, and you got children and you have schedules and, things like this, but we obey. We obey no matter what. Make it a fun event and make a fort. I mean, even, my kids are going to make a fort with the baby. If they could do it with a baby, you could do it with, you can do it too. Make a fort. Let this be fun. Pitch a tent outside. Whatever it is, this is a time of rejoicing, and you know that when you obey, God is going to bestow wisdom and he's going to bless you. So Moses announced to the Israelites the appointed festivals of the Lord. Okay, if you want to read Numbers chapter 29, starting at verse 12. Please feel free to do that. It talks a lot about sacrifice. I'm going to kind of skip over that. It's not that it's not important. I'm just not going to go through it in this video. I'm going to skip ahead to Deuteronomy chapter 16, and I'm going to start at verse 13. Celebrate the festival of tabernacles for 7 days after you have gathered the produce of your threshing floor and your winepress. Why after? Because you're presenting it to the Lord. So after you have gathered that, and this is key, that you are gathering. The other thing that's key is temporary shelters. The word temporary shelters, or the term temporary shelters, but the word temporary. When God brought the Israelites out of Egypt, out of bondage, when he brings you out of bondage, you continue to remain in a temporary shelter in the wilderness, don't you? And when you're resurrected, that shelter is going to change. So he will make you a new creation. He removes your heart of stone. He gives you a heart of flesh, a softened heart. That's your new wineskins. And he pours new wine into you, new teaching, new doctrine. He begins to minister to you. And he speaks to your spirit because God is spirit. So you become a new creation. But the fulfillment of that rebirth is when you are resurrected and you've received that new body. Now you have the spirit he gave you, a new heart, a new spirit in your heart, which is his. Your mind has been transformed by the renewing of his spirit. And then you receive a new body. You receive a glorified body. So you are a fully new soul, a soul that has been born of heaven. Your heart, your spirit, your mind, and then your body is changed. That's the only thing that needed to change to complete that picture. Right now, you're in a temporary shelter. This temporary shelter, is so hard to live in, isn't it? It's hard to withhold. It's constantly fighting against the Spirit of God. Your spirit is willing to do the things of God, but your flesh is weak, and it's just a terrible condition, and I can't wait to be out of it. But he wants us to know that this is temporary. He wants us to know that, and he has set apart 7 days for us to really understand that. It's not going to be easy to live in temporary shelters for 7 days, is it? If you set up a fort in your living room, it's going to be a little difficult because that fort is going to kind of be in the way, probably, just like your flesh is in the way. That's why you need to cut off from the sinful flesh and discipline your physical flesh. It's not easy because you're trying to go about your schedules and the things that you need to do in your family, a busy family life. Those temporary shelters are not convenient. They can be fun, maybe the first couple nights, but after a while, they're not super convenient. But notice at the same time, we're rejoicing. Now, there was a time when you were in bondage, when you didn't think your flesh was a problem. You lived by your flesh. We were evil. It wasn't inconvenient, was it, to be in this temporary state because we lived by it. We indulged it. But now that we've been brought out of that bondage, now that we've been taken out of Egypt, we become very aware of what an inconvenience, what a burden and hindrance this temporary shelter is that we're living in. So every time that you start thinking this is inconvenient or it kind of gets on your nerves or something like that, I want you to shift your heart and I want you to rejoice. Rejoice that you can even recognize that it's difficult to live in this temporary shelter, that it's difficult to withhold. And it reminds me of when the apostles, when Jesus was teaching that he is the bread of life and people were dropping off, disciples were dropping off, and he turned to the apostles and he said, "Are you going to leave too?" And they said, "Lord, where would we go? You have the words that lead to eternal life." You understand that that's putting your hand to the plow and not looking back. Where would we go? There's nowhere else to go. We wouldn't want anything else. That's what you need to remember. And I will tell you from personal experience that I have this thorn and it's very inconvenient and I hate it. And I wouldn't have it any other way. No other way. No looking back. He has the words that lead to eternal life. Where else would I go? Yes, it's difficult. It's difficult to withhold. It's difficult that I once had a really strong body, that I once had a lot of things. And now I'm brought to this low place. He has completely stripped me down, stripped down my body, brought me to a very lowly position. But where do I go? I rejoice because of the joy that's set before me. I rejoice because he's using me, because I'm his, and because I know that this is temporary, and because I can see the difference now. See, there was no difference for me before. There was just giving into my flesh all the time. There was just gratifying the flesh. And before, he was stripping me down because of my wickedness. Now he strips me down for the sake of righteousness. I know the difference. I know the difference between being attacked and harassed by spirits versus suffering for the name and suffering in the flesh. I know the difference now. Rejoice. When you see that those temporary shelters are not super convenient, rejoice that you can even see. Rejoice that there's coming a day when you will be out of this temporary shelter to be with the Lord forever, and you will never suffer this way again. Rejoice that he took you out of Egypt, and recognize what you're supposed to be doing in this temporary shelter. To be honest, the more time goes on, it seems like he's stripping me lower and lower and lower. And I think that's right. That's how it's supposed to go. I don't become stronger. We become weaker. And even in the word in Daniel 12, it says, until the power of God's holy people is broken. I don't think anyone became stronger. Stronger in the Lord, but stronger in the Lord is not stronger in the flesh. Okay, so let's go back to Deuteronomy 16, verse 13. Celebrate the festival of tabernacles for 7 days after you have gathered the produce of your threshing floor and your winepress. Be joyful at your festival, you, your sons and daughters, your male and female servants, and the Levites, the foreigners, the fatherless, and the widows who live in your towns. For 7 days celebrate the festival to the Lord your God at the place the Lord will choose. For the Lord your God will bless you in all your harvest and in all the work of your hands, and your joy will be complete. Okay, so the part that stuck out to me here is celebrate the festival to the Lord your God at the place the Lord will choose. So certainly they were talking about a tabernacle that was to come, right? What is the place that the Lord will choose now? We're the place. We're the temple. Where is that place, by the way? Well, every time that we assemble, we're in that place. What's more special? What's more holy? A building adorned with gold, or his people being purified as gold? His people dressed in the righteous acts of God's holy people. His people adorned in what is beautiful to him, presenting themselves as offerings. That's the place God chooses. For the Lord your God will bless you in all your harvest and in all the work of your hands, and your joy will be complete. That's a promise. It sounds like a promise to me. What is he talking about? Is he saying prosperity, prosperity, according to the world standards? No, what is he talking about? The Lord your God will bless you in all your harvest. Well, if the harvest is his people, then he's going to bless what's in his name. And in all the work of your hands, and your joy will be complete. This is going to bring us joy. And he's going to bless the work that he has us doing. It is a promise, and it is a promise regarding the work that he has us doing, regarding the church, regarding this harvest. 3 times a year, all your men must appear before the Lord your God at the place he will choose, at the festival of unleavened bread, the festival of weeks, and the festival of tabernacles. No one should appear before the Lord empty-handed. Each of you must bring a gift in proportion to the way the Lord your God has blessed you. What did he just say? No one should appear before the Lord empty-handed. When you show up to Sabbath, you must bring something. However small, you must bring something. When you show up to new moon, when you show up to holy days, it is your responsibility in your covenant to participate in your covenant. And you participate in that covenant throughout the week. You have him build you, and then you bring it as an offering to him on Sabbath, on new moon, on holy days. This is your covenant. It's not something that I prefer. I prefer it to go this way when we meet together. It has nothing to do with me. This is your covenant, and it's my job to teach you correctly. No one should appear before the Lord empty-handed. Each of you must bring a gift in proportion to the way the Lord your God has blessed you. When we gather, bring a gift in proportion to the way the Lord your God has blessed you. Bring your testimony. Bring something that God has built in you. Reflect back on what he's done in taking you out of bondage. How has he changed you? What has he done? Surely you have that much. You have that much to bring and offer your testimony. Be a witness of what he has done. Because if you don't witness to what he's done in your life, no one else can. This is your covenant to be the light of the world, to share that testimony. So I hope that you will consider sharing what the Lord has done, bringing a gift in proportion to the way that the Lord your God has blessed you. Your money doesn't matter. Your grain and animal sacrifice, none of that matters. What matters to God? He wants your heart. He wants you to witness what he has done in your life. He wants you to take a minute to see it and witness it yourself, and then bear witness to others of what he's done in your life. How are you different? How are you able to see, now that you've been brought out of bondage, how are you able to see what you were in and what you're in now and where you're headed? What's different? And if nothing's different, then there's a problem. But I know of the people who show up on a regular basis, I see the difference. So I know you have testimonies. That's what we want to be rejoicing over, sharing our testimonies and rejoicing over the harvest. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to assembling with you. Please discern this message with God.